My name is Arthur, and this is the story of how my only son, the boy I raised and for whom I sacrificed everything, left me to die in a nursing home. He told me it was just for a few weeks, a temporary thing while they fixed up my room at his house. But when I saw the look in his eyes, or rather, the way he couldn't look into mine, I knew it was a lie. A man knows when he's being discarded like an old piece of furniture. It's a silence that screams louder than any insult. What would you do in my place? Listen to my story until the end and tell me, what would you have done? And please, let me know from which city you're listening. I need to know I'm not alone in this world. If you want to hear more stories like this one, subscribe to the channel. The drive to the place they called Crestview Care Center was the coldest I've ever felt, and it had nothing to do with the autumn air. I sat in the back of Kevin's new SUV, a car I later learned I had helped pay for without him knowing, and watched the familiar streets of my Chicago neighborhood disappear. My son, Kevin, gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. His wife, Megan, sat beside him, tapping impatiently on her phone. They spoke about everything except me. They talked about a meeting she had, about what the kids needed for school, about a leak in the roof. It was as if I were a ghost already, a silent passenger being transported to my final destination. The promise I made to his mother, Eleanor, to always look after our boy, echoed in my head like a cruel joke. When we arrived, the place smelled exactly as I imagined it would, a sharp, clean scent of disinfectant trying to cover up the smell of old age and loneliness. They walked me down a long, pale green hallway to a room that was no bigger than a closet in the house I built with my own hands. There was a narrow bed, a small dresser, and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. As I placed my small bag, containing only a few shirts and my wife's old picture, Megan glanced at her watch. "Let's go, Kevin. I have a meeting," she said, her voice sharp with an impatience she didn't bother to hide. "He'll be fine. They have professionals here." Professionals? That's what I had become to them, a problem to be handled by professionals. Kevin wouldn't look at me. He just stood there, a big man made small by his wife's command. He walked over and gave me a quick, clumsy pat on the shoulder. It wasn't a hug. A hug is for family. A pat on the shoulder is for an acquaintance you're trying to get away from. "It's for the best, Dad," he mumbled, his eyes fixed on the door. "You'll be safer here, and they'll take good care of you." My hands, wrinkled and spotted from a lifetime of hard labor, started to tremble. I reached into my pocket and wrapped my fingers around the old pocket watch Eleanor gave me on our wedding day. Its cold, smooth metal was the only solid thing in a world that was falling apart. I didn't say a word. There was nothing left to say. I stood there, clutching that watch, and watched them leave. They didn't turn back. They didn't wave. I walked slowly to the window, my old bones protesting with every step, and I saw their car pull out of the parking lot. Kevin didn't even hesitate at the exit. He just merged into traffic and sped away, carrying my life with him. In that moment, sitting on the edge of that stiff, unfamiliar bed, I understood completely. This wasn't temporary. This was an exile. The room they were remodeling for me would become Megan's new home office. I was just an obstacle that had finally been cleared out of the way. The silence they left behind was deafening, filled only with the truth of their betrayal. My life wasn't always this quiet. It wasn't always four walls and the smell of bleach. I look at the small faded photograph of my Eleanor, the only piece of home I brought with me, and I remember a life filled with noise. The clang of steel from the mills back in Pennsylvania, the roar of machinery on a Chicago construction site, the sound of her laughter filling our small house. I was born in the 40s, in a town so small you knew everyone's business before they did. We didn't have much, but we had a sense of belonging. My father worked at the mill until his lungs gave out, and I started there as a boy thinking that was all the world had to offer. The dust, the heat, the certainty that you'd end up just like the man before you. But I wanted more. Not riches, not really. I just wanted a life where my hands weren't permanently stained with grease, and my future wasn't mapped out by the factory whistle. The day I packed my one suitcase for Chicago, my mother cried, thinking she'd never see me again. I was scared, I won't lie. A country boy, in a city that big, feels like a mouse in a lion's den. I had a few dollars in my pocket, and a belief that hard work had to count for something. That belief was all I had. I found a room in a boarding house and started looking for work the very next day, taking any job I could find, just to keep my head above water. It was a lonely, frightening time, but it forged something in me. It taught me that you can't wait for life to happen to you. You have to go out and build it. Then I met Eleanor. She was working as a waitress at a diner where I'd go for coffee, trying to make one cup last for an hour to stay out of the cold. She had a smile that could make a man forget his troubles. She didn't see a poor boy with worn-out shoes. She saw someone trying. We fell in love over shared dreams and cheap coffee. We got married at the courthouse with 2 friends as witnesses. We didn't have a honeymoon or fancy reception. We had each other, and that felt like all the wealth in the world. We rented a small apartment and started saving, penny by penny, for a life we could call our own. She was the foundation of everything I ever built, the quiet strength that held me up. I found my calling in construction. I started as a laborer, hauling bricks and mixing concrete. It was back-breaking work, the kind that leaves you sore in places you didn't know you had. But I was good at it. I was honest, I showed up on time, and I never cut corners. Men trusted my word. Over the years, I went from a simple laborer to a foreman, and eventually, I started my own small contracting business. It was never a big company, just me and a few guys I trusted. We built things that would last: decks, additions, small houses. I liked the feeling of taking a pile of wood and nails and turning it into a home for a family. My hands got calloused and scarred, but it was a good feeling. It was the feeling of providing. The day Kevin was born was the proudest day of my life. Holding that tiny baby in my arms, I made a silent promise to him and to Eleanor. I promised he would never know the kind of poverty I grew up with. He would have every opportunity I never did. He would go to college. He would have a life that was chosen, not one that was forced upon him. Every long day I spent in the summer heat or the winter cold, every splinter, every aching muscle, it was all for him. I wanted him to have a smooth road, even if it meant my own was rough. Eleanor would say I spoiled him, and maybe she was right. But how could I not? He was our miracle. I remember his 8th birthday like it was yesterday. He wanted a new bicycle more than anything. A fancy one, a Schwinn with streamers on the handlebars. It cost more than I could really afford, but I worked 2 weekends straight on a side job to make the extra money. When he saw it sitting in the living room on his birthday morning, his eyes lit up in a way that made every extra hour of work worth it. He threw his arms around my neck and said, "You're the best dad in the world." I held on to that feeling for years. I carried it with me. It was the fuel that kept me going. A father lives for moments like that. You think they'll last forever. You think that love is a fortress that can't be breached. As he got older, the dream of college became a reality. He was smart, Kevin was. He got accepted into a good private university. The tuition was staggering. It was more money than I had ever seen in one place. Eleanor and I sat at our kitchen table for nights on end, going over the numbers. We had been saving to buy a bigger house, a place with a real yard and a second bathroom. We looked at each other, and without a word, we knew what we had to do. We took all of our savings, every last dime we had put away for our own future, and we paid for his education. We never bought that bigger house. We stayed in our small 2-bedroom, and we never regretted it. It was an investment in our son. Then Eleanor got sick. It started slowly, a tiredness she couldn't shake. Then it became something more, something that stole her from us piece by piece. For 5 years, I took care of her. I learned to cook the soft food she could eat. I learned how to help her in and out of bed. I sat with her for hours, just holding her hand when she was too weak to talk. The contracting work slowed down. I only took jobs I could do close to home. Kevin was in college then, building his own life. He'd visit, of course, but he didn't see the day-to-day struggle. He didn't see the woman who had been the center of our world slowly fade away. I never wanted him to. I wanted to protect him from that pain. When she passed, the silence in the house was a physical thing. It was a weight. I'd come home from work and expect to hear her humming in the kitchen, and there would be nothing, just emptiness. Kevin was an adult by then, with a career and a life of his own. The bond between us, once so strong, started to feel thinner. The glue that held us together, Eleanor, was gone. We talked on the phone, we saw each other for holidays, but something had shifted. It was like we were two ships that had been sailing together, and now our courses were slowly diverging. I told myself it was natural. It's what's supposed to happen. A son leaves and cleaves to his wife. He met Megan a few years later. She was ambitious, polished, and very different from the kind of people I knew. She came from a family with money, and she made it clear she had certain expectations for her life. I tried to like her, for Kevin's sake. I told myself that his happiness was all that mattered. But I saw the way she looked at our little house, the way she wrinkled her nose at my work clothes. To her, I was a relic from a past Kevin needed to escape, a reminder of a working-class life she found embarrassing. Kevin, caught in the middle, started to pull away even more, choosing her world over his own roots. When they decided to buy their first house, they didn't have enough for a down payment. They were making good money, but they were spending it just as fast. I had been saving my pension money, living simply just as I always had. I sat Kevin down, just the two of us, and I gave him a check for the entire amount they needed. It was a huge sum for me, a significant part of my retirement savings. But he was my son. I saw the relief in his eyes, and for a moment, it felt like the old days. It felt like I was still his dad, the one who could fix things. As I handed him the check, I tried to give him a piece of advice my own father had given me. "A family is like a house, son," I said, my voice a little rough with emotion. "You have to build it on a solid foundation. Honesty, hard work, taking care of each other. If you don't take care of the foundation, the whole thing will come crashing down. This money, this is just lumber and nails. You have to do the real work." He nodded, but I'm not sure he really heard me. He was already thinking about paint colors and new furniture. He saw the money, but he missed the meaning. He didn't understand that a foundation isn't built with cash. After they moved into their big new house, I saw less and less of them, and I started to notice things. The brand new SUV in the driveway, the expensive vacations they'd post about online, the designer clothes Megan wore. I knew what Kevin earned. I'm a simple man, but I can do basic math. The numbers didn't add up. A knot of worry started to form in my gut. They were living a life they couldn't afford, building a beautiful house on a foundation of sand. I wanted to say something, to warn him, but how could I? I was just the old man from the past. My advice felt as outdated as my work boots. I never took a real vacation in my life. The farthest I ever traveled was back to Pennsylvania to visit family graves. I saved my money, I paid my bills on time, I lived within my means. It's a simple code, but it's an honest one. Watching them, I felt a kind of sadness I couldn't explain. It was like they were chasing a picture of happiness they saw in a magazine, and they were willing to go into any amount of debt to get it. They valued things. While I had always valued people, they were building a life of appearances, and I worried constantly about what would happen when the first strong wind came along. Now, sitting here in this sterile room, I hold the old pocket watch Eleanor gave me on our wedding day. Its steady ticking is a rhythm from another life, a life of purpose, of love, of sacrifice. I sacrificed my own dreams so my son could have his. I gave him the foundation for his life, piece by painful piece. I built his house, and now there is no room in it for me. All those years of hard labor, all that love, all that sacrifice, it led me here, to this closet-sized room with a window that looks out onto a brick wall. The ultimate irony is that the very success I gave him, the life I paid for, is what made me disposable. This betrayal didn't happen overnight, like a sudden storm. It was more like a slow, creeping frost, the kind that settles in so quietly you don't realize everything has frozen until you try to move. After Eleanor passed, the house felt too big, too quiet. For a while, Kevin would call every day. Then it was every few days. Then once a week. I told myself it was natural. He was building his own life, starting his career. A father is supposed to let his son go. But there was a difference between letting go and being let go of, and the line between them started to get blurry. It was a slow, painful fade from his life. Then he brought Megan home. She was polished, like a new car. She spoke about brands I'd never heard of and vacations to places I couldn't find on a map. She came from money and she never let you forget it. I tried, I really did, for Kevin's sake. I'd see him look at her with such admiration, and I wanted to see what he saw. But when she looked at me, at my calloused hands and my simple flannel shirts, her smile never quite reached her eyes. I wasn't a person to her. I was a piece of his history that didn't match the new furniture she was picking out for their future. Their wedding felt like I was attending a stranger's party. It was at some fancy country club, and I felt as out of place as a work boot on a ballroom floor. Her family, all doctors and lawyers, looked right through me. They were polite, of course, but it was the kind of politeness you show to the hired help. Kevin was so swept up in it all, in the glamour and the expense, that he didn't seem to notice. I saw him across the room, laughing with his new father-in-law, and for the first time, he looked like he belonged more with them than he did with me. It was a quiet, sharp pain, a feeling of being left behind on the shore while his ship sailed for a richer port. The first few years after they married, the little cuts started. I'd visit their apartment, and Megan would make a joke about the old person's smell of my pipe tobacco, a habit I'd had for 40 years. She'd talk about how they were decluttering their lives, and her eyes would land on the old framed photo of me and Eleanor I'd given them as a housewarming gift. Kevin would just give a weak smile and change the subject. He never defended me. He never said, "That's my dad you're talking about." He just let her words hang in the air, slowly chipping away at my place in his world, and in his home. When their first son, Michael, was born, I thought things would change. For a little while they did. I was a grandfather. I had a purpose again. I'd go over and rock him to sleep, change a diaper, give Megan a break. I saw the old Kevin in those moments, the boy who looked at me like I knew all the answers. It was a fragile peace, a temporary truce in a war. One didn't even know I was losing. I held that little boy and I thought, this is the future. This is the bond that will hold us all together. I was so naive, I thought blood was thicker than ambition. As Michael and his sister Sarah grew up, Megan's rules became a wall between us. "Grandpa, don't let them get their clothes dirty, they're new." "Grandpa, we don't do sugar in this house." The worst one, the one that felt like a slap, was when I'd start to wrestle with Michael on the floor, making him squeal with laughter. Megan would swoop in with a tight smile and say, "Arthur, let's not get them all wound up, they have their schedule." She wasn't protecting their schedule. She was severing our connection. She was teaching them that I was the disruption, the chaos, and that her sterile order was what mattered most. My birthday became a sad joke. In the years with Eleanor, it was my favorite day. She'd make my favorite meal, pot roast, and we'd have a simple cake. After she was gone, Kevin tried to keep it up, but once Megan was in the picture, it changed. First, it became a dinner out at a restaurant of her choosing. Then it was just a quick stop at their house for cake. The last few years before I moved in with them, it wasn't even that. It was just a card in the mail. Inside would be a crisp $100 bill. It felt like a payment, a transaction to absolve their guilt for another year of neglect. It wasn't a gift. It was a dismissal. Family dinners became an exercise in humiliation. When they bought that big house, the one I helped them pay for, I thought we'd be a family under one roof. But at the dinner table, I was systematically erased. At first, they sat me at the side. Then, as their social circle grew, I was moved to the very end of the long, polished table, like an afterthought. The conversation would fly back and forth over my head, about their friends' divorces, their stock portfolios, their upcoming trip to Italy. I would just sit there, cutting my food into smaller and smaller pieces, hoping no one would notice I hadn't said a word in an hour. I began to feel like a ghost haunting my own family. I'd be sitting in a chair in their living room, reading the paper, and they would walk in and out of the room, talking to each other, making plans, completely oblivious to my presence. It's a strange feeling, to be physically present, but emotionally invisible. The silence wasn't about peace and quiet, it was a form of communication. It was a constant, low-level hum that said, "You are not relevant here. Your time is over. We are just waiting for you to fade away completely." A man can withstand shouting and anger, but that kind of deliberate, polite indifference can break your soul. One Saturday afternoon, the loneliness was eating at me like acid. I heard them in the hall, getting their coats. They were going to the mall. My heart gave a hopeful little leap. "Mind if I tag along?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. I could use the walk. I didn't even care about the shopping. I just wanted to be near them, to feel like I was part of a family, even for an hour. I wanted to see my grandchildren, to maybe buy them an ice cream cone. A simple thing. A thing a grandfather should be able to do. Megan stopped in the doorway and turned around. She didn't have a coat on yet, just a silk blouse that probably cost more than my entire monthly pension check. She looked at me, not with anger, but with a cold, hard impatience, like I was a dog that had tracked mud on her clean floor. "Arthur, please understand," she said, her voice clipped and sharp. "We have our own lives. We can't be at your beck and call all day." The words hit me with a physical force. At my beck and call? I hadn't asked them for anything in months. I just wanted to walk with them. But the real blow wasn't her words. It was Kevin's silence. He was standing right beside her, tying his shoes. He heard every word she said. He didn't flinch. He didn't look up. He just kept tying his shoe, his focus intense, as if it were the most important task in the world. He didn't defend me. He didn't say, "Megan, don't be ridiculous. Of course you can come." He said nothing. His silence was his answer. It was his vote. In that moment, he publicly chose her and her cold, selfish world over me. The foundation I had spent my life building for him didn't just crack. It turned to dust right there in that hallway. After that day, something inside me just gave up. I stopped trying. I stopped asking. I retreated into myself and into the little house that still held the ghost of Eleanor's laughter. I became a polite stranger who lived down the street. I waited for them to call, to invite me, to remember I existed. The calls became less frequent, the visits shorter. They were busy, they always said. Busy building a life that had no room for the man who had laid its first stones. I was a living relic, a black and white photograph in their high-definition world. Then the new strategy began. It started with subtle comments from Megan, which Kevin would later echo. "This old house is a lot of work, Dad. Are you sure it's safe for you to be climbing that ladder to clean the gutters? It smells a little musty in here, don't you think?" They weren't expressing concern for my well-being. They were building a case against my independence. They were painting my home, my sanctuary, as a prison, a burden. They were laying the groundwork for their solution, and I was too tired and too heartbroken to see it for what it was. The final, brilliant move was suggesting I sell my house and move in with them. It was presented as an act of love and generosity. "We'll build you your own suite, Dad. We'll take care of you. You won't have to worry about a thing." I was so starved for their affection, so desperate to believe I still mattered, that I agreed. I sold the house where I had raised my son, where I had loved my wife, where every corner held a memory. I handed over a significant portion of the money from the sale for the construction of my new room, believing I was buying back my place in the family. Moving into their house was the final nail in the coffin of my dignity. I wasn't a family member, I was an inmate. My suite was a small room in the back, next to the laundry. My life was confined to those four walls. If I left my reading glasses on the coffee table, Megan would pick them up with 2 fingers and place them outside my door. I was an inconvenience, a disruption to her perfect, curated life. I was living under the same roof as my son, but I had never felt more distant from him. My own grandchildren became strangers to me. They were taught, through unspoken cues from their mother, to keep their distance. "Grandpa's resting," Megan would say. Even if I was just sitting in my chair, wide awake, praying, one of them would come in and talk to me. They were always busy with iPads, playdates, and scheduled activities. The spontaneous joy I remembered from when they were toddlers was gone, replaced by a polite, distant respect. I was no longer the fun grandpa. I was the quiet, old man who lived in the back room. The moment of absolute, undeniable truth came late one night. I had gotten up to get a glass of water, and I heard them talking in the kitchen. They thought I was asleep. Megan's voice was full of frustration. "I just can't work like this, Kevin. This little desk in the corner is a joke. If I just had a proper office, a dedicated space, if we just had that one extra room." There was a pause, and then I heard my son, my only child, the boy I gave everything for. His voice was low, conspiratorial. "I know," he said. "I know. I'm working on a solution. Just give me a little more time." That was it. I wasn't a person. I was an obstacle. My room, my existence was the problem. And the solution was the end of the line. The solution was this place. They think they left a frail, confused old man here to wither away. They see this room, this bed, this silence, and they think it's the end of my story. They believe they've successfully cleared out the clutter from their perfect life. What they don't know, what they never bothered to understand, is that the old man in the corner of their lives was the only thing holding their world together. They think they discarded a burden, but what they really did was kick out the last pillar supporting the roof over their heads. They have absolutely no idea what's coming for them, and the thought brings me no joy, only a deep, hollow sadness for the boy I raised. My son and his wife, they live in a beautiful house of cards. From the outside, it looks solid. The big SUV, the trips to places I've only seen on a postcard, the clothes that cost more than my monthly food budget. They built a life that looked good in pictures, a life designed to impress Megan's wealthy family and their circle of friends. But I knew. A man who spent his life in construction knows a weak foundation when he sees one. Theirs wasn't built on hard work or careful savings. It was built on a mountain of secret debt, a chasm of financial desperation they hid behind bright smiles and new electronics. The first hint I got was about 10 years ago. A letter came in the mail, a plain white envelope with a red urgent stamp on it. Kevin was out, and Megan snatched it from the mail pile before I could even see who it was from. But I saw the look on her face. It was a flicker of pure panic, quickly masked by annoyance. Later that night, I saw the corner of it sticking out of the kitchen trash can. I pulled it out. It was a final notice from a credit card company. The amount was staggering. It was the first time I realized their shiny life was a performance, and the ticket price was far more than they could afford. My first feeling wasn't anger. It was a cold, sharp fear that shot right through me. I thought of Eleanor. I remembered standing by her bedside, holding her frail hand, and promising her I would always look after our boy. "He's a good man, Arthur," she had whispered, "but he has a soft heart. Don't let the world break him." I saw that letter, and I thought of her words. I saw my son, not as a grown man making foolish choices, but as the little boy she had asked me to protect. I believed his family, his marriage to this difficult woman, would shatter if their financial lives were exposed. So I decided to do something. I found the credit card statement, the one they had thrown away, and I called the number. My voice shook a little as I explained I wanted to settle the account for my son. The person on the other end didn't care who was paying, as long as someone did. I went to my bank the next day and arranged a transfer from my savings account. It was a significant amount, enough to make my stomach clench. As I signed the papers, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. I had stopped the immediate bleeding, but I knew, deep in my bones, that this was only the beginning of a long-hidden sickness. I knew I couldn't handle this alone. I needed advice. I called an old friend, a man named Frank, who had been a manager at my local bank for 40 years before he retired. We met for coffee, and I laid it all out for him. Frank, a man who could read a balance sheet like a good book, just shook his head slowly. He agreed to help me, to be my quiet advisor. He set up a separate account for me, a place where I could move my pension and savings to make these payments without them being easily traced back to my main checking account. He became my silent partner in propping up my son's life. The first wave was the credit cards. It wasn't just one. It was 3 of them, all maxed out, all drowning in interest rates that would make a loan shark blush. Frank helped me track them. We'd get the information sometimes from another accidentally opened letter, sometimes through Frank's discreet inquiries. Over the course of 2 years, I paid them all off. Every last cent. It came to just over $45,000. $45,000 of dinners I never ate, clothes I never wore, and gadgets I never used. It was a fortune to me, a huge piece of the nest egg Eleanor and I had so carefully built. The secrecy was the hardest part. It was a weight I carried every single day. I'd go to their house for a holiday, and Megan would show off a new designer handbag, and I'd have to smile and nod, knowing that my pension check from last month probably paid for it. Kevin would talk about the stress at his job, and I'd want to scream, "The real stress is the lies you're living," but I said nothing. I just played the part of the quiet, simple old father, all the while acting as their secret, unpaid accountant and benefactor. I was funding the very lifestyle that was making them look down on me. Then came the car, that big black SUV that Megan was so proud of. One afternoon, another official-looking letter arrived. This time, they didn't even see it. It was a notice of intent to repossess. They were 4 months behind on the payments. I could just picture it. A tow truck showing up in their perfect cul-de-sac, hauling away their status symbol in front of all the neighbors. The shame would have destroyed them, or at least, that's what I told myself. It would have destroyed Kevin, and my promise to Eleanor echoed in my ears. So I went back to the bank. Frank met me there, his face grim. This was a bigger payment, $25,000 to get the loan current and pay off the penalties. I remember the bank teller, a young woman, looking at the withdrawal slip, and then at me, as if to ask if I was sure. I just nodded. I walked out of that bank, feeling 20 pounds lighter in my wallet, and 100 pounds heavier in my soul. I had just bought them their pride back, and they would never even know it was for sale. The next time I saw them, Kevin was washing that SUV in the driveway, whistling a happy tune. The final straw, the one that should have woken me up but didn't, was the personal loan. They told me they were taking out a $30,000 loan for home renovations. They wanted to finish the basement, they said. I knew they were lying. I was a contractor my whole life. I know what a renovation costs and what it looks like. No work was ever done. Not a single nail was hammered. That money just vanished, likely used to pay for a vacation to Hawaii they posted all over social media, or to cover other, deeper debts I didn't even know about. That loan went into default within a year, and like a fool, I paid that off too. I kept a ledger. In an old notebook in the bottom of my sock drawer, I wrote down every payment. The date, the amount, who it was for. One night, about a year before they brought me here, I sat down and added it all up. The credit cards, the car, the personal loan, the little emergencies here and there. The total stared back at me from the page, a number so large it didn't feel real, just shy of $100,000. My life savings. The security I had built for my own old age, all siphoned away to fuel their fantasy. They saw me as a simple man, an old construction worker who didn't understand their world of finance and ambition. They saw my calloused hands and my flannel shirts and assumed the mind behind them was just as simple. They would talk about stock options and investment portfolios in front of me, using big words as if I were a child who couldn't possibly comprehend. They never once suspected that I understood their finances better than they did. I knew exactly how fragile they were, because I was the one patching the holes below the waterline. My greatest mistake was not understanding human nature. I thought my help was a shield. I thought I was protecting them, giving them the space they needed to get on their feet to mature. But it wasn't a shield, it was a crutch. And they never learned to walk on their own because they never had to. Every time they stumbled, my invisible hand was there to catch them. My sacrifice didn't teach them responsibility. It taught them that there were no consequences. It taught them that they could have whatever they wanted, and the bill would somehow, magically, just disappear. And that's how I ended up here. My secret support is what made my presence a problem they could afford to solve. I wasn't a financial burden, so I became a physical one. By ensuring they never had to sell their big house or their fancy car, I made it possible for them to clear out my room for Megan's home office. My love, my protection, my life savings, they were the very tools they used to exile me. The pillar they leaned on was the same one they were happy to tear down once they thought they were secure on a higher floor. But sitting here, in this quiet room, something has finally become clear. The promise I made to Eleanor wasn't to keep Kevin from ever falling. It was to help him become a man who could get back up on his own. By shielding him from every consequence, I failed him. I failed her. My protection is over. The safety net I have secretly held beneath them for a decade is now gone. I will not make another payment. I will not answer another call from a creditor. For the first time in their adult lives, they are about to feel the true weight of their choices, and I will no longer be there to catch them. For weeks I sat in this room, and the initial shock, the raw pain of being discarded, slowly cooled and hardened into something else. It wasn't hate. I don't think I have it in me to hate my own son. It was clarity. A cold, hard clarity like a winter morning. I realized my promise to Eleanor wasn't to shield Kevin from every storm. It was to teach him how to build a shelter. By secretly paying his debts, by absorbing the consequences of his and Megan's reckless choices, I hadn't been a shield. I had been a crutch. I had kept him from ever learning to stand on his own 2 feet. My final act as his father wouldn't be another secret payment. It would be to take the crutch away and finally let him learn the cost of his own life. My help was over. The safety net was gone. The next morning, I asked a kind nurse, a young woman named Maria, who always had a warm smile, for a large manila envelope, a pen, and a stack of plain white paper. She brought them to me without question. I sat at the small desk by the window, my old ledger open beside me. That little notebook, filled with my careful, blocky handwriting, was the only thing I brought from my old life that truly mattered now. For 3 days, I worked. My hands, stiff with arthritis, moved slowly but with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't an angry old man seeking revenge. I was a contractor, a builder, doing what I've always done, laying out the plans, making sure the foundation was clear for everyone to see. I was building one last thing for my son, a mirror. I wrote a short, simple letter. There were no accusations, no flowery words of hurt or disappointment. Those feelings were my own, and I would carry them. The letter was just a statement of fact. It said, "Kevin, effective today, I will no longer be providing financial assistance. Enclosed you will find the records for your own information. I hope you and Megan find a way to build a stable future. I wish you well, Dad." That was it. I read it over and over. It was clean. It was honest. It was final. It wasn't a cry for help or a demand for an apology. It was a release. I was releasing him from my protection, and in doing so, I was releasing myself from the burden of his lies. The truth was no longer my secret to keep. The bulk of the work was in organizing the documents. I had brought the originals of the most important notices with me, tucked away with the ledger. I paid Maria $10 to use the office copier, and I spent an afternoon making duplicates of everything. The overdue notices from the credit card companies, the letter threatening repossession of the SUV, the default notice on that personal loan for the renovation that never happened. I attached my own bank statements, showing the transfers, the checks I had written. I arranged it all chronologically, creating a timeline of their secret ruin. It was a map. A detailed, undeniable map of the financial disaster I had single-handedly held back for a decade. It was the full, unvarnished story of their life of appearances. On the fourth day, the package was ready. It was thick and heavy. Heavy with the weight of my life savings, heavy with the weight of their secrets. I sealed the manila envelope, wrote Kevin's name and address on the front, and gave it to Maria with a $5 bill to cover the postage. "Please make sure this gets in the mail today," I said. She smiled and promised she would. I watched her walk down the hall with it, and I felt no anxiety, no regret. I turned and walked back to my room, and for the first time since I arrived, the silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like peace. I had done my last job. I had taken down the false structure I had helped build, and now, whatever they built in its place would be their own. My dignity wasn't in their big house or their fancy car. It was here, in this small room, in the quiet knowledge that I was a man who had finally finished his work,